If you have a bird that's been beat up by the other birds and you're wondering what should I do about it to make sure they recover just fine, that's what I'm going to get cleared up for you in today's video, so stick around. Hey guys, welcome back to another Slightly Rednecked video. Again, my name is Chris. If you're not familiar with this channel, I help you to produce your own meat, eggs, and vegetables from your backyard, your balcony, your deck, your garage, or heck, even a spare room in your house if that's the way you want to do it. Today we're going to be talking about injuries in your birds when they get beat up by your other birds, and what exactly do you do about that to make sure they recover. I've got a couple of birds in here. Let me get one out and I'll show you what I'm talking about that have been just a little bit beat up. Let me find one real quick. All right, so this is a rooster here, and let me show you. You can see he's probably, maybe you can see his eyes kind of puffy there. He's been kind of beat up on the eye. Really, it's both sides. It's not just one side, it's the other side too. He's been beat up in this eye too, pretty good. So they actually looked way worse a couple of days ago. Let me get him back in there and I'll tell you kind of what we do about this. Okay, that's a pretty common injury you see, especially in roosters, and especially when they first come into the breeding season. It seems like what happens is the roosters just get a little bit aggressive with the hens. The hens decide, I've had enough, and they start fighting back a little bit, and they usually go for the eyes, and they'll peck the eyes out of the other birds. And you also see this pretty common whenever you try to mix birds together. So you take birds that are not familiar with each other, and you put them together. They'll typically will pick on the outsider, and they'll peck at his face and his eyes and things. They can actually do a lot worse damage than that. Most of the time, as far as treating this goes, there's very little you have to do. Actually, I do almost nothing. As long as you keep the cage clean, there's not a lot of droppings building up in the cage, that kind of thing, they generally recover just fine. I've seen some really nasty injuries to the face and stuff, and they generally recover just fine. Now, many people will suggest, let's take him out of there. Let's separate that bird out, leave him on his own until he heals up, and then put him back in. You know, that can work, but what I will caution you about is, again, generally speaking, one of the big reasons for that happening is when you try to introduce new birds to an existing flock. So, you know, if you take that bird out, you put him on his own, you let him recover, and then you put him back in with the rest of them, he's going to be a new bird to that flock, and he's probably going to get picked on all over again. What I find generally happens is once that bird gets picked on like that, gets his eyes pecked out a little bit, then he's a little bit calmer. He recovers just fine in a couple of weeks, and you never have a problem with it. Just, again, it's like they put him in his place, and he's figured out where he goes in line with the rest of the flock. One thing I will say is, if this is a very common problem in your birds, if you've got a lot of roosters that are all beat up like that, you may have too many roosters in your flock. And I've talked about this before, but you know, generally you don't want to have more than maybe 1 to 4 or 1 to 5. 1 rooster to 5 hens, 1 rooster to 4 hens, somewhere right around in that. Don't go any higher on your rooster count than that, because the females will get overbred. What you'll end up with is feathers on the back of their heads missing, which is, again, a pretty common thing. Let me see if I can find one real quick. Okay, here's a hen. You can see she's got feathers picked out the back of her head. This is actually this is actually nothing to worry about. This is just from breeding. But again, if you've got too many roosters, you'll see the feathers gone all the way down the back of their head. There's not really anything you need to do for that either. Just make sure you get your hen to rooster ratio right, so the hens are not getting overbred. Okay, so generally speaking, the injuries in your birds, unless it's a broken bone or something like that, they're going to recover just fine. They're amazingly resilient little birds, and I've seen them come back from some pretty bad injuries where they've got the feathers plucked out of their whole head is plucked free of feathers, and just recover just fine from that kind of thing. Again, it seems to be kind of a way for the other birds to kind of put them in their place, establish where they're at in the pecking order, and by just leaving them together, letting them recover. They're not continuing to pick on that bird with the swollen eyes. They're not pestering him anymore. They're not really picking on him anymore. So he's recovering right now, and it's not going to be a problem going forward. So that's my general guidance on that. A couple of things I will say is that one of the reasons why I really like my jumbo Pharaoh quail, which are in my other hutch over here, is that they do seem to be a little less aggressive than any of your other colored strains. These are a Schofield Silver, and they're not super aggressive, but right at the start of the breeding season, when the males first come into breeding, they start crowing, they start breeding the females, that's when I usually see those problems kind of happen. And they happen for a couple of weeks, maybe a month, and then they're done for the rest of the breeding season. I don't have a problem until the start of the next breeding season. But I've not yet had one of these birds get killed by one of the females picking on it or any of those kinds of things. All of them have recovered just fine. Let me take you over and show you my jumbo Pharaohs so you get an idea of what they look like. See if I can open this up without them all running in the other side. All right, so these are the jumbo pharaohs, and they're just a standard brown color, and they just do seem to be a lot calmer than any of the other color strains, especially the whites. For some reason, the white quails, what everybody calls, Texas A&Ms, they're not really A&M birds most of the time. They're usually something else, but either way, those white birds tend to be a little bit more aggressive in my opinion. So do some of the other color strains, whereas these tend to be the most docile, calm, mellow birds. Don't see a lot of fighting in these guys. All right, so I will say that, again, I don't really do anything with my birds generally. I just keep an eye on them, make sure it doesn't develop an infection of some kind, but I have yet to have that happen even. If you want to add antibiotics, do some kind of ointment around the wounds, those kinds of things, you can definitely do that. I just find that most of the time it's really not necessary. They pretty much recover almost 100%. The worst I've ever had is a bird that maybe lost an eye, just stayed blind in that one eye, but he lived out his life just fine. It didn't seem to bother him at all. It didn't slow him down one bit. So typically speaking, full recovery is what I see out of them, 9 times out of 10 with any of these birds that have been picked on by the other birds. So hopefully that puts your mind at ease a little bit. Thank you so much for watching this video, and as always, God bless.